Well, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today, and thank you so much to the Principal Center for hosting such a wonderful opportunity to discuss literacy as a human right. Yes, it is human right, isn't it?
Thanks.
And all of us in this room are leaders in that space, regardless of the role that you play. But thank you so much, Dr. Brezicha, and also Dr. Wagoner. So Georgia has responded to the literacy as a right call to action. We now have an early literacy legislation, House Bill 538 or even Senate Bill 211. And our panelists today will share the impact that that legislation has had in their spheres of influence, whether it's in an elementary school or even in the post-secondary realm. So I will start with you, Dr. Wagoner. How do principals and school leaders respond to the literacy crisis in our communities?
Thank you, Dr. Whitaker. It is an honor and privilege to be here today to share with you all just a little bit about our journey. But I truly believe that it's the principal's role that makes impact and a difference in the trajectory of every child's literacy in a school building. So for us, a comprehensive plan to address people over programs was our first priority. There was an enormous pedagogical knowledge gap between what happens in our classrooms and what the science of reading says. We have to address this gap in teacher knowledge head on. Whether you're a leader or a teacher, new to the classroom or seasoned, an investment must be made in this pedagogical understanding so every educator can carry out their responsibility for leading reading and teaching reading in our schools. It begins first by investing in people over programs, establishing that comprehensive plan for the principal and the teacher to be immersed in the science of reading. In Marietta, this investment began in 2021 with partnerships through Atlanta Speech School, Margie Gillis from Literacy How, Doug Glasser from Top 10 Tools for Reading Teachers, and Justin Crowley, formerly from the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy. Principal and teacher knowledge was built through a shared approach where we completed traditional coursework alongside in-person professional development and coaching. We work through coaching cycles to move knowledge into action. We can't just give our teachers and our principals that knowledge. We have to carry them into a place where they take that knowledge and make transformation in their classrooms. As we begin our fourth year this year, we are still on that same journey. We know that knowledge is ever growing and changing, and we continue to complete coaching cycles on a monthly basis with science reading facilitators. Our teachers are starting their 19th coaching cycle over the last 4 years. We can't just know more. We have to actually strategically and systematically take action on this new knowledge. I would urge every principal and school leader to establish a comprehensive plan to fully immerse every teacher in deep knowledge building through that traditional coursework coupled with a regular coaching and supportive network in those schools. In our state, Georgia Literacy Academy and Cox Campus offer free coursework in structured literacy. Every child deserves access to a teacher who can teach them how to read, and every teacher deserves to be provided with the knowledge to be an effective reading teacher. Prioritizing people over programs has been the first response as principals that we could take to address the literacy crisis in our schools.
I love that. We need to prioritize people over programs. And the people that we have in our schools are ultimately our teachers. And when I think about post-secondary's role in teacher preparation, Dr. Brezicha, your role is key because as Dr. Wagoner has said, and you provided professional learning in the K-12 space for those that were already teachers. But in post-secondary, you are preparing our teachers. So please tell me and tell us, how did the work with the University Systems of Georgia for the Science of Reading Higher Education Consortium evolve?
Thank you. And I'm so excited to be on this panel because having worked with a group of faculty members for the past year, really thinking about how to do this work, it's wonderful to hear how it's being done already. And so for us, as the University System of Georgia, we realized that the House bill was really just part of a broader suite of legislative initiatives, right? It was part of the dyslexia move. It was part of MTSS establishing all of that. And so this is really not meant to be seen as something different from the previous legislative efforts. It's already like an augmentation of what's happening. Part of that legislation, though, did include a mandate for the PSC to create rules around our educational preparation programs. And so when you think about the people that are coming from Georgia State and from the USG systems, they are now being trained in specifically the science of reading in a very different way. And so that's just involved establishing a new course for the teachers. On the leadership side, as you all know, in educational leadership, right, what do educational leaders need to know? And that was what I was really involved with working. So we had literacy experts of about 100 faculty members, over 100 faculty members from across the USG come together, and that included literacy experts, it included educational leadership experts, and we then came together as a small group to develop a working group that sort of helped win it. Because as you know, as instructional leaders, we need to know a variety of things. It is not just literacy, it's also math literacy, it's all of these things. And so trying to recognize that we're training and preparing school leaders to be able to work in a variety of contexts and settings, but that ultimately everybody needs to have an understanding of what does it mean to prepare students to leave their schools literate and ready to communicate with the rest of the world, right? And so that's a lot, right, to kind of narrow into, is we also have a lot of other things that we need our school leaders to leave our programs prepared to do. And so over a course of a year, we settled in on working on 3 modules. In those modules, we're specifically teaching the first module about literacy, because we cannot assume that our leaders come in with the knowledge of how literacy works. What's a phoneme? What's a morpheme? All of those things are not necessarily everyday knowledge. And so providing school leaders with a background to understand the fundamentals of science of reading and what is actually being told as a myth, right? For example, that they'll catch up at some point if they don't know how to read, they'll just figure it out. Well, that's not true. We know that. And so preparing school leaders and kind of dispelling myths that may have been formed in the past is really part of the work in the first module. And then in the second module, it's really thinking about what are the evidence-based practices that school leaders need to know. What's the best science available right now? And then, so for that, we kind of thought about it as a 2-tier system, because in Georgia, as you all know, we have our 2-tiered systems of certification, right? So our tier 1 students are prepared to be our assistant school, our assistant principals, et cetera. Really thinking tier 1, they will have the first 2 modules. Once they go into tier 2, we know that you are then at that point also selecting curricula and doing the coaching and the professional development. And so module 3, which is guided towards, focused on the tier 2 students, is all about how do you select the best curricula for your school? How do you then coach your school in these processes? Because principal is critical in how we shape this. So that's how it all evolved.
Well, I think it's key. Both of you mentioned teacher preparation, and both of you mentioned leader preparation. And we are here as a part of the Georgia State Principal Center to talk about the leader's work. So yes, the teacher is critical, but the leader is critical as well. And so I'm going to actually turn back to you, Dr. Wagoner. So the urgency to address the literacy crisis should be a real and present driver of our schools. It sounds like coherence to me with Dr. Schleicher. So what systems can principals and school leaders institute in their schools to result in real progress for our children?
Well, you've heard the selection of curriculum, so that's certainly one. But even prior to that, we have to think about the assessments that we put forth in our classrooms, how our assessments building on a teacher and a principal be able to know if their students are proficient readers. So following that knowledge building and the role that plays in both teacher preparation and leader preparation in the school, there has to be some systematic approaches to what action a principal is going to take in their building. Principals must be willing to look at every layer of literacy in those schools, from assessment, personnel, to the instructional environment that's created. Beginning with that assessment piece, our assessments of student learning must align with the science of reading. Old assessment systems must be retired in our classrooms. We can no longer rely on previous assessment systems that give us ambiguous information about whether a child can read and what level they may be reading on. And these ambiguous assessments give little to any insight for a classroom teacher to know what actionable steps they can take to ensure that a child is developing the appropriate word recognition skills to become a skilled and proficient readers. So in our school, we adopted an assessment system that was diagnostic and allowed for prescriptive instruction in the key foundational areas of literacy, beginning with phonemic awareness, phonics, decoding, encoding, and oral reading fluency. From assessments, principals must create systems to maximize the use of personnel in our building. We have a lot of people in our building. Are the people doing the right work? And are we using all of the people to the greatest advantage to make sure that every child, when they walk in our building, leaves our building as a proficient reader? In Marietta, we provided schools with reading specialists. Reading specialists work with students reading below grade level to accelerate student learning, ultimately closing the reading gap. Reading specialists and their work is monitored on a regular basis through systems like MTSS, RTI, ensuring that students are meeting those marked measures to tell us if the child is becoming a proficient reader. We can no longer wait and see. They'll catch up. They have to meet those goals by the end of each year. At Westside, we have instructional requirements that we have employed in our schools to create an environment where all children can have access to an effective school-wide reading program, grounded in the work in the National Center on Improving Literacy at the University of Oregon. Our instructional requirements include clearly defined reading targets at every grade level, a comprehensive core reading program, so going back to the selection of curriculum, to ensure that we're teaching both word recognition and language comprehension, which are key for our children to be able to become deep readers. A diagnostic assessment system that we administer 3 times annually to all students, kindergarten through 5th grade, to measure progress, and providing small group instruction to all students in the building, kindergarten through 5th grade, every single day. The time that students receive small group will vary based on need, with a minimum of 30 minutes for Tier 1 students, upwards to 90 minutes for students in Tier 3, depending on how far our children are from meeting what the end-of-year goal is. So again, thinking about that acceleration to ensure that students are meeting that grade level expectation by the end of the year. The principal is ultimately responsible for creating and monitoring all of these school systems, from assessment, personnel, and instructional requirements to ensure that we're creating a culture in our schools where all students can become that skilled and proficient reader.
And Dr. Wagoner, you said a word that I say quite often, which is monitoring. So I do wonder, how do you monitor that? So how many classrooms or how many students are at Westside? How many classrooms? What does that monitoring system look like? Because when I'm looking across this room, there are a lot of people who monitor systems of instruction. So I would love to know your tips and books.
So we have 560 students in our building and 29 homework classes, and I have 2.5 reading specialists, on paper, but my folks work part-time, so they can, all the reading specialists, so they can be available during the literacy block. So that gives me 6 people, head count-wise, to be able to support during our small group instruction time at the building. We do a sweep of assessment where we assess all 560 students within the first 5 days of school. So by the 5th day of school, I know where every child is in terms of phonemic awareness for our primary children, to decoding, encoding, which is spelling, and oral reading fluency. Myself and my admin team and my instructional coaches, we look through all of that data on the 6th day of school and assign every student to a reading small group teacher that is responsible for teaching them for that 30 to 90 minutes, depending on need, throughout the course of the day. We do a midpoint check. So as a district, we're required to administer diagnostic assessments 3 times a year, but we do midpoint checks between those required diagnostic windows to see which students are responding and making the grade that's expected based on the grade level benchmarks and targets that we have defined for decoding expectations and fluency expectations. And if students are not responding at that midpoint check, we increase the amount of instructional time they're receiving. We are doing, of course, monitoring through classroom observations and visits, but that data and progress and student mastery of the critical areas that we are assessing them on is my first area that we are monitoring. So at a minimum, it's 3 times that we do midpoint checks along the way. For students that are progressing through FTSS or various levels of tier, there's more frequent progress monitoring every 2 weeks. And my TSS coordinator is responsible for collecting that data, uploading it, and we view that data on a 2-week period as an admin team to decide, do we need to move forward with increasing intervention, or do we need to potentially invite parents in to have further discussions about their child's progress in reading. But it is definitely a hands-on approach from the principal to the assistant principals, my instructional coaches. We are assigning every student to who their small group reading teacher will be, again, based on personnel, where our strengths and weaknesses, who are my skilled first grade teachers at teaching word recognition, who are my skilled first grade teachers at supporting language comprehension, and being strategic with where students are placed during that small group reading block. We're no longer placing the responsibility on the classroom teacher to say, here are your 21 kids, have small group instruction every day and figure out how to make it happen. We did that far too long. We've taken the reins, or we're standing in the trenches with the teachers, making sure that the kids are in the right places.
Excellent. So I've heard a lot of different systems for monitoring and a true understanding of early literacy and understanding that the first grade teacher matters. As oftentimes in elementary school, we want to think about third grade teacher as and second grade, because it's not just about that accountability year at third grade, but that foundation that is set. Excellent, excellent. So now, Dr. Brezicha, the work that is being done at the post-secondary level is evolving. So the law is in place now. There was a lot of work to help the entire USG system set up and get ready for the implementation of the law. So now where is that work evolving?
Yeah. So we actually had a chance to pilot our modules over the summer with a small group of students who are going through our programs. And then now it's being rolled out to all of the GSU, UGA systems, because we were partnering in the creation of these modules. Those modules will become available to the entire USG system, but we wanted to kind of have a chance to pilot them with our students and make sure they were working and tweaking as we go along. In addition, the consortium is continuing to continue its efforts on education by hosting a monthly series of workshops with bringing in literacy experts, specifically around topics like phonemic awareness, word recognition, all of those things that are supportive for literacy experts and others who would like to come. So I'm happy to share that with maybe Dr. Coward if she wants to share that with the group, because those are open and available for others to attend if they're interested. And then in addition to that, because we can't teach what we don't know, all of the educational leadership faculty are also participating in these modules and completing that work, because that's important for us as well to be able to support our students.
So the leadership must be aware, not only in the teacher preparation, but those that are observing, those that are teaching. Excellent. So back to you, Dr. Wagoner. How have the literacy reformers in your school cultivated human right for all of our children to be skilled and proficient readers?
I think it takes the responsibility of the principal and every classroom teacher to recognize that every child deserves the right to read, and it's every adult's responsibility to teach them. So even if I'm not in the classroom doing the daily teaching, I still have the responsibility to make sure that that child leaves the end of that grade level, the end of that school year, as a skilled reader. The work in our schools has drastically changed the outcomes for our students over the last 4 years, with an intentional focus on reading progress from kindergarten to first grade to second grade, all the way through fifth grade. We have watched the number of proficient readers rise at tremendous rates. We are not doing anything that cannot be replicated across every school in our state. There's no magic that's happening other than intentional focused work on part of our teachers and the leaders in my building. We have closed proficiency gaps by 23% in 3 years as measured by Georgia milestones. We cannot settle for just marginal growth at this point when a child's future is limited by the inaction of the adults in the classrooms. According to research in neuroscience, with proper instruction, we know that 95% of people have the cognitive ability to learn to read, meaning the vast majority of individuals sitting in our schools can become proficient readers when provided high quality evidence-based instruction. Why in our schools would we settle for anything less? And that was really the charge that I gave my teachers 3 years ago. We were defined as a relatively high-performing school when 63% of the children in my classrooms could read. That is in what I consider far from high performing. And so it really took us shifting that focus from what science tells us about the cognitive ability to read and then what our numbers were telling us of what was happening in our classrooms. Why schools can we settle for anything less? We have been on a mission to reach that marker of 95% since we began this journey. And at the end of last school year, 96% of our third graders were proficient readers in our classroom. Really, a statistic that we felt we could be proud of. So I would really charge any principal or school leader, what statistic will you own for the students in your classroom? I feel confident that with the right knowledge, coupled with action and systems, that every leader can lead this work, every teacher can teach reading, and every child can have access to the fundamental human right, to the right to read.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wagoner. That is those are some phenomenal results. What you said? That's definitely thank you. So, as far as Dr. Brezicha, is there anything else you would want to add to make sure that our audience is aware of the work that post-secondary is doing to help support the human right, which is to be able to read?
Well, know that this is the work that is ongoing in in post-secondary. And so we are working hard to provide support for all of our school leaders that are coming through our programs, and know that this is something that we very much are working on in all of our classes, even though they may not be focused on those particular areas. But this is something that is a continuous journey. So we will be supporting you right along. So
Awesome. Well, at this time, I would love to open up for some questions from the audience. We have a phenomenal panel here today that have shared their journey and their work around literacy being a human right. And so anyone, and we do have a microphone, so please raise your hand.
Dr. Wagoner, you talked about training for your principals and your teachers. Are they attending the same training together, or are there separate trainings that are geared specifically to principals?
That's a great question. So principals began to work, March of 2021, and teachers began their study in July of 2021. So we were just a couple steps ahead of where our teachers were, but we all completed the same floor in terms of what the coursework requirements were. And at Marietta City, we used Deb Glasser's top 10 tools for reading teachers. There's 10 modules. We completed the 10 modules, which were all online over the course of 2 years. So 5 modules in year 1, 5 modules in year 2. Following the completion of each module that the principals and teachers completed, which were the same, then the in-person professional development and coaching occurred in the school. So we would complete a module on phonemic awareness, and then a science reading facilitator came into the school, provided a refresher of this is what you learned online, let's see it in action in the classroom. That was delivered through PLCs where teachers gathered during their PLC time over 2 consecutive days, and the principals attended all of those professional development sessions with the science reading facilitator right alongside their teachers. And we have continued that same system. Of course, we've completed the online work and modules following the end of year 2, but the insight or on-site coaching work has continued on that monthly basis provided by the science reading facilitator, which is now just a reminder of these are the practices, and each month has a focus going to all of the key areas of literacy, starting from world language, moving into phonics, and continue to progress through that way.
Any other questions? We have maybe the opportunity for one more. And wait.
I have a question in regards to your scheduling. Talking about the Sunday small groups, how much time are students in the literacy block potential experience attending? What does that scheduling look like across those city levels when you're assigning those skills, the teachers and students?
So going back to really analyzing the systems that we had in place, the National Center for Literacy Excellence at the University of Oregon has a planning and evaluation tool that schools can complete with leadership teams to really look at the individual literacy practices happening in the building. And one of those practices are you provide adequate instructional time in the area of literacy. The recommendation from the planning tool is 90 minutes with an additional instructional block for small group instruction to happen. So in my building, what that looks like is we have 30 minutes for whole group phonics, kindergarten through 3rd grade. That's your tier 1 instruction. We have a 75-minute reading and writing block. Marietta has recently adopted Wit and Wisdom as a supplemental program to support language comprehension and reading comprehension. So that occurs during that block of the day. And then we have a 60-minute small group block where at Tier 1, students will receive 30 minutes of small group instruction every day, but that will graduate up to words of 90 minutes depending on the child's level of need that they have. So it's a lot of time, 30, 75, 90, potentially. Quick on math right now. It's a lot of time.
Thank you. An instructional block and frameworks. And there is one more question. Your fact. We talk more about the students taking ownership, how you partner with them for them to take more ownership in it. The question was, can we talk a little more about students taking ownership and what did that look like?
I would say that, in our classrooms when we have 5, 6, and then 8, 9-year-olds, we have to really start with the ownership of the adults first. And until we see the transformation of the instructional practices that align with the science of reading and the adults taking action, would we then shift focus to the students taking action. So I think that placing that responsibility on the child to own their learning comes at a stage that's developmentally appropriate. In my building, maybe, 4th to 5th grade, you can start to have some conversations around, are you putting forth your best effort? What does your best effort look like? Let's talk about what it looks like to practice your reading in the classroom. But that's not a conversation that we've had often in my building, is placing the responsibility on the child. It's more, what are the adults doing?
Well, I want to thank both Dr. Brezicha and also Dr. Wagoner. I think we would all say that it does take the adults to recognize what it means to have literacy as a human right. Not only to recognize it, but then to put forth the thoughts, the intention to making it happen for all children in our schools. So thank you.
Thank you.